My parents would be celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary and would be throwing a large party. My mom, being overly excited, had lent out my room to a relative to stay while visiting, forcing me to have to find some other place to stay. I travel quite a bit, and when I do, I will usually stay in an Airbnb. I decided to rent out an Airbnb for the 3 days I'd be home. I figured it'd be less stressful staying on my own since I wouldn't have to worry about entertaining anyone or helping with any plans. I arrived at my Airbnb after hanging out with my family for the day, ready to get some much deserved rest. I retrieved the key from the lockbox and made my way inside. While getting settled in, I received a text from the Airbnb host wishing me an enjoyable stay and thanking me for booking with him. After thanking him and assuming our conversation was over, I received another text from him that caught me off guard. He wanted to warn me about the neighbor next door. A little bit about the layout. The Airbnb I booked was a 2-story townhouse, which was connected to another townhouse to make a duplex. The only thing separating the two townhouses was one wall. The host told me the neighbor wasn't all there, and she had caused problems for guests in the past. She would constantly complain about the guests being too noisy. The host asked if I could please keep it down in order to keep the peace and not to upset her. A bit annoyed, I told him I'm not there to cause trouble or upset anyone. He apologized to me for the inconvenience and even offered me an extra night free for being so understanding, which I took him up on. Later that night, after watching a movie in bed, I laid on my back trying to fall asleep. As I lay looking up at the ceiling, I could have sworn I heard what sounded like hysterical sobbing coming from the other side of the wall. The neighbor must be having a mental breakdown, I assumed. She kept wailing and throwing something on the ground, completely interrupting me while trying to fall asleep. The noise sounded like a heavy thud, followed by something wet like a mop would sound. A bit annoyed, I started knocking on the wall. I figured this would be enough to have her be a little more quiet, especially with how late it was. Instead, she started pounding on the walls and yelling incomprehensible things. A bit freaked out, I stood up off the bed and started yelling back at her to calm down. Her yelling intensified, becoming louder and angrier. The familiar thud could be heard, but this time against the wall. Every time whatever she was throwing against the wall would strike, it made this wet, sticky sound. I was full on terrified at this point. I yelled over at her to be quiet or I'd be calling the cops. Just like nothing happened, everything went completely silent. It must have worked. I snapped her out of whatever episode she was stuck in. Now I could understand what the host meant and why the other guests would leave freaked out. I calmed myself down enough to finally get some rest. After a few hours of sleeping, I woke up extremely thirsty. I walked downstairs into the kitchen to fill up my water bottle. While at the sink, I started to get an uneasy feeling like someone was watching me. I could feel eyes being burnt into the back of my head. I turned around and my soul about left my body when I saw the silhouette of a person standing behind the sliding glass door in the kitchen. The person stood still, looking directly at me while holding something in their hand. I yelled at them to leave or I'd be calling the police, trying to sound intimidating. The person started pounding on the glass door, yelling, sounding completely deranged. I told her to leave once more, but this time with a whimper in my voice and not one bit of fearlessness. She set one hand on the glass and looked at me one last time before dropping whatever she had in her other hand. She walked off. I took that as my chance to seek shelter in the bathroom and call the police. Police arrived within minutes, and I told them everything that happened. They went over to speak with the woman, but she didn't open the door right away. I believe after almost 10 minutes, she opened the door and admitted to police she had gone over to my place, but only to gift me something. When I found out what she had wanted to gift me, I lost complete feeling in my body. She had killed her pet cat and placed it in a plastic bag. Police arrested her, and she couldn't understand why she was being arrested, further illustrating how out of her mind this woman truly was. I packed my bag and threw everything into the rental. I wasn't worried about getting a refund. I was just looking forward to leaving and not coming back. My name is Enrique, and I have only been a police officer for a little over 3 years now. Back when I was still a rookie, my partner and I were dispatched to a home where the owner claimed to have been hearing rustling sounds and voices coming from down in the basement. The house was only a mile or so away from where we were, and we decided to make our way over. Once arriving, my partner and I saw a couple standing by the doorway. We approached the couple and they introduced themselves to us. The husband told my partner and I they were renting this home through Airbnb. The husband had contacted the host and was told that raccoons and other vermin were known to sneak into the basement from time to time. The husband wasn't completely sold that it could have been a raccoon, however. He was concerned someone had broken into the home. He told us it sounded like boxes were being moved and shifted. At one point, he heard a box fall. He swore he heard a voice coming from the basement. He could easily distinguish the sound of S, T, and B. My partner told them we'd be taking a look through their home to be sure everything was safe. We had them sit in their car and lock it for their safety. We made our way in, and I couldn't help but notice how big this place really was. It was a family home with at least 4 large bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and 2 stories. My partner and I split up. We decided to split the bottom floor, and my partner would also be taking over the top floor. I didn't dare argue with him. It was the first time I'd be clearing a room by myself, and I was extremely nervous. I made my way through my portion of the home. Everything was clear on my end. My partner was still clearing the upstairs portion of the home, and while he finished clearing upstairs, I decided I'd take it upon myself to clear the basement. The basement door was right next to the fridge in the kitchen. I remember feeling completely uneasy when I began approaching the basement door. Childhood fears of eyes staring back at me from within a dark room began to cloud up my thoughts. As silly as it sounds, I still get terrified of being alone in the dark, especially now as a police officer responsible for the well-being of others. I reached for the doorknob, turned it, and opened the basement door. All I saw was a flight of stairs leading down into the basement. I made my way down the stairs, jumping and flinching with every creak. I made it to the bottom of the stairs and unholstered my weapon. I could see boxes spilled everywhere, but these boxes were entirely too large for a raccoon or a possum to knock over. I began flipping the boxes over, expecting to find some sort of vermin hiding underneath one. I was convinced whatever had been down there had more than likely left, and I made my way back up the stairs. I had made my way to the top of the stairs when I heard a shifting noise. As terrified as I felt in that moment, it was my job to turn around and investigate. I made my way back down the stairs and was faced with an extremely thin woman standing by the stack of boxes I had just picked up. I immediately unholstered my weapon once more and ordered her to get on the ground. She ignored my commands and instead began speaking under her breath. I couldn't make out what she was saying. She had one hand resting on a box and the other hand behind her back. I ordered her to show me her hands and to get on the ground. She ignored my commands once more. The whispers began to grow louder, and I could hear what she was saying a lot clearer now. She kept repeating, "Get out of my house," over and over again. I had my hand on my weapon, but I was too afraid to use it. Seeing this woman in a dark room with only limited lighting was so chilling. The visual was so haunting, especially in almost complete darkness. My body shut down, and I had lost the feeling in my hands. Just then, I heard my partner yell at the woman to put her hands behind her head and to drop the knife. I heard the crashing thud of the knife hitting the floor. She listened to his commands. He turned on the light, and I could get a better look at the woman. She was older, around 60 or so. She had long, greasy hair and wore a nightgown. When my partner ordered the woman to put her hands behind her head, she kept whispering under her breath. My partner and I managed to put her in cuffs. She didn't fight us. When we brought the woman out, I could hear the couple gasp and the wife scream. I've never seen anyone display so much fear in my life. We let the couple know their Airbnb was clear and ready for them to go back in. Understandably, the couple decided it was best they pack up and leave. My partner and I found out the woman once owned the home with her husband and her 5 children. Once her husband passed away, she had a mental breakdown. She wouldn't eat and she wouldn't speak to anyone. Her kids had no choice but to seek psychiatric help for her and sell their family home. Medical personnel at the psychiatric hospital she was admitted to claimed to hear her speaking to herself at night. Staff was surprised to hear she broke out of the hospital, since she never liked leaving her room. I had gone a majority of my life with no one but myself. I didn't have much family around, and my parents passed when I was still a teen. I'm an only child and don't speak to any of my closest family members. My life was very lonely up until I got myself a dog. His name is Chester, and he's a German Shepherd. Ever since Chester was a puppy, he's been very overprotective of me, and he enjoyed being right by my side. It gave me so much joy to finally be able to feel what it's like to have someone love you back. Chester and I loved going on adventures, and we'd go somewhere every summer and winter. We decided to drive up to Salt Lake City for a nice little getaway in the snow. My parents would bring me up to Alta for skiing back when I was a kid, and I figured it would be nice to relive those moments. Instead of booking a hotel room, I decided it would be nice to book an Airbnb with a decent amount of room for my energetic pup to run around. We made it to the Airbnb around noon. We'd be staying a 10 to 15 minute drive away from Alta. Since it was so close and we had arrived earlier than expected, we decided to hit the slopes. Later that night, we returned home and we were entirely exhausted. But even through my exhaustion, I couldn't help but notice I had forgotten to lock the front door. Chester made his way into our Airbnb and immediately began to sniff the air and growl. Entirely too exhausted and hungry to put up with Chester, I pet him on his head and told him dinner would be ready soon. While enjoying dinner on the couch, I couldn't help but notice Chester wasn't eating his food. Instead, he was sitting right beside me on the floor and kept looking around and sniffing the air. I pet him on his head and told him to eat. He'd need all of his energy for tomorrow. We called it a night around 11 or so, but I couldn't fall asleep right away. Chester kept growling at off hours of the night, interrupting my sleep. I kept having to tell Chester to be quiet, but he kept ignoring my commands. Eventually, I got tired of Chester's growling and had him leave the room. He kept bearing his weight down, fighting me to leave the room. He whimpered and looked up at me as if he were trying to beg me not to kick him out. I closed the door, and now Chester's whimpering and growls were muffled, still loud but not loud enough to interrupt my sleep. My sleep was suddenly interrupted by the sound of the closet door opening, but I assumed the door hadn't been fully latched. I don't scare easily, and I wasn't worried about hearing any house noises. I drifted off to sleep once more, but I was suddenly awoken by Chester full-on freaking out, scratching the bedroom door, and barking louder than I've ever heard him bark before. I turned over to my bag, and was horrified to see a man standing over me, his hands out, reaching for my throat. He managed to grab my neck, but didn't have a good enough grip, and I was able to break free. I pushed the man off of me, and he toppled over the bed. I ran past him and managed to get to the door. I froze for a moment and looked back at the man. He struggled to get back on his feet, but when he did, I heard a sudden click sound. The man had retrieved a pocket knife and was staring right at me. What I did next was selfish on my end, but if I planned on surviving, it was my only choice. I opened the door, and Chester ran into the room and bit the man right on the arm. Through the man's sounds of agony, I heard his pocket knife hit the floor. I managed to kick the knife away from the man and retrieve it to use as my own form of defense. I had Chester keep the man subdued on the ground until police arrived. After receiving medical attention, the man was placed in handcuffs and was put in the back of the patrol car. I spoke to one of the officers on scene and gave him a full description of what went on. What happens next still makes my blood run cold. The responding officers had interviewed the man while he was receiving medical attention. The man was staging the area and had simply walked in through the front door since I'd forgotten to lock it. He had been walking through the house and made it to the master bedroom and hid in the closet when he heard my car pull up. He told police he planned on suffocating me while I slept and would be stealing all of my valuables to sell in order to get himself his next fix. Police had never seen this man before and couldn't identify him since he was homeless and didn't have any form of ID. Luckily, Chester was safe, and I couldn't be more grateful for my pup. The officers on site kept telling me how lucky I was to have had Chester there with me that night. If I hadn't, my night could have ended completely different.